what I like to see, a theater full of people. How great does it feel to be back in a theater, in an IMAX theater, to see a movie like Dune? Give yourselves a round of applause. So Dune is nominated for 10 Academy Awards. That's 10. So it is nominated, among others, it is nominated for Best Picture, Best Cinematography, and Best Adapted Screenplay. My name is Scott Mance. It is my honor to moderate today's conversation. Please welcome to the stage, we have Academy Award nominated cinematographer Greig Fraser. Producer Mary Parent. And director, co-writer, and producer Denis Villeneuve. Well, congratulations to all of you. I mean, 10 Oscar nominations after a very successful theatrical run. You built it, and they came. So, Denis, the first question is, I know that you are a big fan of the book. You love the book. Like, what made you say, I got this?
What do you mean?
In terms of just like, I know how to make this movie. I know what this movie is going to be.
Well, first of all, I will start to say by saying thank you so much for having taken the time to come to watch the movie in the theater today. It means the world to us. Thank you, because as I hope you experience, it has been designed to be seen on such a screen. In fact, Greig Fraser and I and Mary, we saw our first camera test here in this room, and that's where we decide how we will approach this movie, which format, which kind of camera, etc., which kind of lenses. It has been one of the first steps of the filmmaking process was here, and one of the last steps of the movie was also made here when we finalized the DI and everything. I will say that it's a project that that has been cooking for 40 years. So when you ask me how did I think that what was the strength of this project and what was singular to me to this experience is that it was always the love that I had, that very visceral reading that I did when I was 13 years old, and I always related to those, the emotion, the impact of the book when I was 13 years old. So as Hans Zimmer said that at the time, he said we made this movie like teenagers. Yeah.
Do you still have the copy of the book that you read when you were 13?
I did, yeah, I do actually.
That's cool.
It came with me in the desert all the way through as a talisman, like a kind of a Bible.
So, Mary, the first conversations that you had with Denis about this, like, what made you say this is our guy? I have so much faith that we have the right director for this movie.
First of all, he's one of the best filmmakers working, so there was that.
There's that.
Very generous.
True. He's very humble. The second thing was, this film works or has to work on so many different levels. On one hand, it's a very intimate, almost Shakespearean family drama, and then on the other hand, it's this giant, massive, epic, cinematic, undertaking. And so Denis is one of the few filmmakers that can do both.
So Greig, this is your first movie with Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah.
So how
quite an important one as well. So yeah.
That's a good one. So tell me about those first conversations that you had, and especially because unlike Denis, who's diehard fanboy with the book, your appreciation was a little different.
Well, I hadn't read the book, so I didn't know. I knew basically the story. But effectively, what I did is I just let Denis speak. You can hear from his conversation now the passion that he has, and he's really able to tap into that 14-year-old teenager feeling and so emotionally he was being very clear about how the film was going to be, how it was going to feel, and I just let him speak. I wanted to this film, my experience of this film, to be through Denis' eyes, and not through my own perception of what I took on as having read the book. So I didn't read the book.
But did not being like super into the book actually present its own advantages?
Well, yeah, because I could hone and focus. I wasn't fighting. Like, as a cinematographer, or as an image maker, you're constantly fighting images around in your brain. Like you drive down the street, there are billboards. You know, you're constantly fighting things to not make a film with the tools and lenses, and so I really tried to focus on what our film was and what Denis wanted our film to be. So I tried to close all the doors in my brain, image-wise, to what this film wasn't. So that allowed us to kind of focus and hone in on what this film is.
So one of the things I love about the film, I mean, and there's a lot. So, you know, when you're watching a movie that is done on green screen and with computer-generated effects and so on, I mean, it's all great, but you can see that it's very different than when you were using sets and you were using models and you were using just practical filmmaking. How strong was your mantra, Denis, to keep it real?
I have to give a lot of credit to Mary here, because the idea is that I'm old-fashioned, meaning I love. I think that as a filmmaker, maybe because I'm coming from the documentary, I'm inspired by life, by what I can see in front of the camera, and I have difficulty to work in virtual environments. And so we didn't invent nothing. I mean, we just did the movie as they used to be done. Now, it would be a lie to say that there's no visual effects in the movie, but we didn't fall for, if you can reassure you, it's like no, there's tons of VFX, but it's true that we tried to build as much as possible to inspire Greg, to ease our work with the light, and more specifically for actors, because it's not the same when you put someone in a green room or there's a real set with real environments like it.
So Mary, because there was such a push to make it so grounded and so real, so when it came to all the crafts, like whether it's production design, hair, makeup, wardrobe, but also sound and editing, like how early on did it really feel like you had all hands on deck from all the crafts, and not just, you know, certain people came on later?
Pretty early. Many of the people Denis had, were frequent collaborators, and obviously there were some, new partnerships like with Greg and Jackie, but Denis knew who his team was going to be, and he brought them early.
So Greg, when you were prepping with Denis, like what kind of cameras were your favorite cameras to use?
Well, what was good about this is we had ideas about what this film might be technically, because there is that thing when you make a movie, it's all good and well to talk about ideas and concepts and but then you've got to make it happen. You've actually got to physically shoot it somehow. So we thought we knew what we wanted. We thought we knew how we were going to do it. We thought we knew, based on our experience, separated from each other, what we were going to do together. And we tested film, we tested digital, we tested Alexa, and we thought we knew what the solution was until we sat in that chair, probably, and we all went, oh, this is interesting. This is not what we expected. This is not what we want to do.
Yeah, we were thinking, if I may jump in, I was thinking going to a 35 millimeter. I was like, for me, I was going back to 35, and I knew that Greg is not. You're not a dogmatic cinematographer. You are open to. You have to everything but we sat here, and the three of us, in fact, felt that it would be Alexa NF, the large format camera that would allow us to capture the movie that I wanted to do, and also to go in very difficult and harsh conditions, low light conditions, and to go in the desert. It felt very cinematic, profound, and not nostalgic. That's what I felt it. It was a big surprise for me that we didn't choose 35.
It surprised me as well, because we had the opportunity to do that, and one would think, well, we could do whatever we wanted to. I mean, in theory, but actually, the camera at that point had gotten, the Alexa I'm talking about, had gotten good enough that it was able to be shooting this movie. You know, like obviously we would never make a compromise on the portal used to record these performances in this movie. Like this, it's really important to make that a very important part of the puzzle. But yeah, it was a great opportunity and great solution. And again, we sat here and looked at it this big, and that's where we went, wow. That's where you start to go, okay, that's the format we're going to do.
Yeah, LF felt like a new territory, and it was there was something exciting, and it felt like the movie I had in my mind. So it was obviously I dreamed in digital when I was 13.
On the LF in the 4:3 format.
So you know, Mary, when you're working with actors and they're doing a lot of filmmaking where there is a lot of green screen, but then when they get to go on a big huge set and they get to go on location and they're in the desert, I mean, doesn't that just bring out so much more out of their performances?
And that's a Denis thing, but yeah, I think it absolutely does, and I guess Greg could comment on whether that made your life easier or harder. I'm not sure. I guess it depended on the day.
Yeah, I mean, once you deal with real light and real sets, yeah, you've got to get sand in every bit that you have. So you could say in some regards it was harder, but I think ultimately, again, just going back to the fact that if something's real as possible, then it automatically has a truth to it, you know, visually.
Sure.
And, you know, I think that then translates to the screen. And yes, again, Denis can answer more about acting performances, but I'm positive that every human that stands in the wind, in the sand, in the middle of the desert, gets something from that.
So it would have not been possible to do the movie we made on stage or on the backlot. I mean, there's tons of shots that we made that were like either inspired or possible because of the scope of where we shot.
When it comes to the scope of the film and the scope in which it was made, it's very tricky to make sure that that scope doesn't overwhelm the emotion. And I think that, I certainly, absolutely think that the emotion absolutely shines above all else when it comes to the crafts. How much did you try, how challenging was it for you to make sure that when you were writing the screenplay with John and Eric, that you made sure, look, the play's the thing. You gotta have the character, you gotta have the emotion. That cannot be overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's maybe the first thing that Mary and I talked about. I mean, that it will be, the movie will focus on that boy, Paul Atreides, and for me it was important that it focused on Paul and his relationship with his mother and his father. It's a very intimate journey. The way we made this adaptation was through intimacy. I mean, you can adapt this book in very different ways. It's a book about geopolitics, about the environment, about climate change, about the impact of colonialism. But at the end of it, it's also a very intimate journey, and I focused on and I made sure that the way we wrote the screenplay, and my job, I was paid as a director to make sure that we would protect this intimacy on set.
Yeah, Mary, after films like Noah and The Revenant, which were, without question, enormously challenging movies to produce, what made this different? What were the unique producing challenges that you faced on Dune?
They're all different. I wish, you know, if there was a formula for each one, but I think the most difficult part was the adaptation. That was a really, really difficult process because the book is amazing, but it's so complex and there's so many different layers. And then I think we were fortunate to have, you know, incredible people like Greg and Jackie and Patrice and Denis had like a mind meld because they had worked together. But Denis had such a clear vision. The easiest films to produce, in my opinion, are when you have a filmmaker that has such a precise vision, because then it's a lot easier to, you know, sort of fall in line with how best to support that and problem solve around that. And Denis knew exactly the movie he wanted to make, while at the same time you would experiment at times, you know. But I think you had the ability to do that because you were so prepared, you know. Timmy used to talk about, and I think it's right, how despite the size of the film, it almost felt like an independent film.
We had the gods of cinema with us. I mean, when we landed in Jordan, we spent weeks there, and we had the perfect weather. What I meant by perfect weather was strong winds, and white skies, and it was like always on the verge of a sandstorm, and we were so deeply happy. And that's I give a lot of tribute to Greg and his team, because you guys have loved that.
Oh, we loved it. Yeah. But
He said he loved it.
but going back to the whole independent film thing, that's what was really interesting about this, and what I personally, as a cinematographer, always try and find when I'm on set. Because ultimately, whatever's behind you, whoever's behind you, could be thousands of people making the shot happen, but ultimately, it doesn't matter. There's a camera there and there's an actor there, and if those two don't work together, along with the script and what they're saying. So that intimacy is really important, and that was what we were hopefully trying to achieve on every setup, trying to achieve an intimacy, even on some of the bigger stuff where people are running and there's wind machines and there's ornithopters being craned into position. Like, it is ridiculous how big it is when I'm sitting here saying how small it was. But that ultimately, you're talking about characters together, and a camera and a character playing a little dance.
You just did an interesting thing. I mean, you didn't talk about that, but you did the film out, which added a whole other layer of sort of emotion.
Yeah.
How did making films like Rogue One, Star Wars Rogue One, and like Zero Dark 30, which had some desert locations, prepare you, and how did they not prepare you?
Well, I've got the best crew in the world, so ultimately I just have to turn up, and I have to just turn up and
Yeah.
having slept. So my crew are the ones that have to deal with the sand and all the bits and all that stuff. So it prepared me, because I think it prepared my crew technically and me technically. So when we went to the desert, we knew what we had to do to prepare ourselves to make it look as easy as possible, so that there was no technical stuff going on to stop the relationship between Denis and the actors. That would have been, had anything broken, that again would have been terrible, because then that stops production. So to give Denis and the actors as much time with performance and to cover it as possible. So it definitely gave us some.
It's true what Greg is saying, that it was a beautiful crew, the level of discipline and commitment, and it was really, they were Navy SEALs. I mean, because we brought them in very remote areas in the desert with harsh conditions, and there was always like the level of enthusiasm and energy was deeply touching. When you see people, because it's of course it's a difficult environment to work with, but it's so rewarding for the camera.
We were also very fortunate, I don't know if it's fortune or good casting, but we had great cast that were also very lovely humans.
Yeah.
So despite the fact that they're incredible performers.
That was pure luck.
I mean, we had these actors that were trying to do their thing. I don't know how actors do it in the first place, let alone in the middle of a windstorm, miles away from anywhere. So I think that combination was just such a joy from a personal level, actually, as well.
And Mayor, how early on in the development process with Denis did you say we gotta divide this, we gotta do this in two parts to do it
It
justice?
wasn't my call, it was his, and he said it basically day one, and I was thankful that he said it, because it was overwhelming to think about not doing that.
I think it came from first brainstorm with Eric Roth. When I woke up one morning, I said that it won't happen in one movie. And I shared the idea with Mary, and you spontaneously said, you're right. There was no discussion. I mean, it's just like, we both agreed spontaneously.
It hadn't occurred to me that it seemed so obvious.
So Greg, I asked, when you have, one the great thing for sure about having, the big sets and being on location, and the realism in all this is that it's just so much better. But it's also got to be, when you're filming like wide shots and some of the big sound stages, it's got to be like a nightmare to set up. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, physics is a thing, and the sun works a certain way, and the film businesses worked for the last 100 years to try and replicate real things, and it's never quite right. So, we knew that we had to be very honest with the lighting. I mean, I think we knew it as a group, but particularly as the person who had to make that happen technically, I had to fight. I mean, when I say fight, there's no real fight. It's more about just being, dogged. You just want to be like, no, this is the way it's got to be, and that's not often normal. Like, often you would build sets inside, we built sets outside. we built sets to harness the real sun, which required a commitment from production, required a commitment from Denis, knowing that the sun moves. We could be shooting on stage and we had the same light for 10 hours, but in this case we have certain window to get certain shots, and it was a little bit like a rehearsed kind of theatre show at times. We're going, okay, so we know that between 10:53 and 11:03 we can do that shot. From 11:04 to, it was as stringent as that because the sun doesn't stop moving.
And when we shot inside, I remember the moment when we walked on one of the biggest sets, and I was super moved and excited because Patrice had designed, it was huge, like a temple. So the feeling when you enter a cathedral and everybody's a judge, right? But Greg walked and said, now I have to lit that thing. Because it's like, it was so huge and there was not a lot of space because the set was taking the whole stage, and it was for you a real technical challenge to try to bring some naturalism to it, because I insisted that I wanted the movie to look as naturalistic as possible.
Invariably it always happens because you never get a stage that's big enough, because that's just life. It doesn't matter what the film is, you never have the stage big enough. You never have quite enough, and then everybody builds the sets right to the edge of what they can do, and then it's always like this little struggle. Thankfully we've got a fantastic group of collaborators that kind of understood each other's struggles. So between Paul, our VFX suit, who was fully into the whole idea of natural light and having it feel real, was help supporting painting things out that ordinarily you might not have to, or Patrice built it a certain way. So together as a group, and again, this comes down to kind of great production supporting that, great director knowing that you're doing things for a certain reason, that it might take away certain options, certain angles, but therefore, so yeah, it was all very, very collaborative. Fantastic process.
Yeah, Denis, these last few movies that you've directed in 2013, Prisoners, this phenomenal movie. I mean, really, if you haven't seen it, it's probably on HBO Max. Watch it, it's awesome.
It's a comedy.
And also, of course, I'm an Arrival. Amazing, right? Arrival is amazing. And folks, Blade Runner is like my favorite movie of all time. I did not think they could make a movie that was even as good as that did. So, Denis, my question is, how do you go from Prisoners to Arrival to Blade Runner to Dune, and your progression, and what were the unique directing challenges on this that you were different from Blade Runner 2049?
But I'm always, seriously, I don't have a plan, a career plan, but it's always choosing projects that I know that I can technically honor. And I would have never enter Mary's office 10 years ago. I knew that it's just that cinema is a learning process. Every movie you learn, okay? And I just felt that I was ready, as I was doing Blade Runner, I knew that I had finally enough knowledge about world building, about VFX, about to tackle something of the size of Dune. Now the difference between Dune and Blade Runner, on Blade Runner, the big difficulty was to walk into the footsteps of a giant, which they to try to honor what Ridley had done, which will Me Too. Blade Runner is probably one of my top, second or one favorite movie of all time. I deeply love Blade Runner, the original, and so it was like just to try to honor the giant. But the universe has been built has been dreamed by somebody else. Now I was referring to the dream of a teenager that I had been myself, to try to not disappoint myself. It was the big challenge with Dune, because that's the thing. One of the first human beings I talked to after Mary and I met was Hans Zimmer. Hans had read the book at 14 years old, and it was one of his biggest dreams to score this movie. I can say that because he said that publicly numerous times. And I remember we had a dinner together, and he looked me in the eyes, and he said with this bit, he said German accent, said, "Is it a good idea to do our oldest dream?" It's difficult because you know that the chances that you will disappoint yourself are very huge. Yeah, so that was one of the big difference. I will say that here the challenges were that technically it was by far the most difficult film I was attempting to do. One of the big difference, of course, is that we went into real location. Blade Runner was mostly shot entirely on stage. This one was a big part of it was shot on location. So.
Wow. Greg, I want to ask about your collaboration with the VFX supervisor and your production designer.
Well, Paul, VFX supervisor, is incredibly, he's very much light-centric. Like, often what would happen is you're sitting around a table to discuss, I mean, we're all filmmakers in here, so we know, like, okay, how do we achieve X, Y, and Z? And everybody has an idea about what they want. Someone might want to do it on stage because it's the only stage available in that window, because that's what the schedule says. Someone might want to do it a certain different way technically. Paul would always be the first one when there was an idea that didn't quite honour the light. He would always be the first one that goes, but the light. And I just want to give him a hug every single time. Because normally that's my job. So I'm normally the a-hole really that sits there and goes, no, I can't do that because the light won't work. But he actually was doing that a lot. So, you know, I slipped him a few Hungarian florets every time I did it.
Yeah, I would say that if I may, Paul, the VFX supervisor, and I had been to the Roger Deakins school where we did Blade Runner together and spending a year working with Roger, teaching us. I will talk for myself, but I'm sure that Paul learned a lot, spending a year listening to Roger, how to approach light, and that's the truth.
I should slip Roger a few Hungarian florets. But the other thing too, again going back to that with Patrice as well, you know, Patrice's concepts on this were incredible. They were the best concepts I'd ever seen in my entire life. They were so fully realised. Even from a lighting perspective, again, so that placed the bar quite high. So I knew that I couldn't walk past that amazing artwork and then look at my image and go, oh, my image is not as good as his image. It was a bit of it wasn't a competition, of course, but it was just keeping the standard high. And you know, Paul and Patrice were there very early on as well, and we looked at the process of filming out. So one of the things with the format is we chose the LF to shoot in IMAX, but then we tested a few concepts of putting it out to film, which I tested a little bit before on previous jobs, but never really appropriate. So hearing Denis speak here about what he loved about the LF and what he didn't love about the LF, because it wasn't all perfect. We had to configure lenses, there were some things we changed.
Sure.
But then we tested the idea of filming out to film to help give back. And some people, I've had this debate with people, someone's actually come up to me partying and said, should just use live grain. There is programs you can use to put grain on. I was like, you missed the point. Unless you've actually done that test and seen the difference between a sunset and on film and digital, you know the difference. That it's absolutely obvious what the difference is. So it's not a digital thing. It's not a grain thing. It's not a texture thing. It's something substantive about the film, which gave our film something extra.
It's very humble, because I will say that the artwork, it's true that the artwork was, I brought with the artist at the beginning something about the light, the quality of the light that I was looking for, that will look very mundane, very like kind of everyday light, and something very naturalistic. And all the artwork that Patrice did after was so ambitious. It was so difficult to do, and you always like try. It's like I was always amazed to see how you achieve that. I mean, it was so difficult.
Went to my office and cried. I was confident. Like, yeah, we can do that. Went into my office and cried. Got on the phone to my gaffer and said, "How the hell are we going to do this?" So that I was a good actor. Maybe I'm a better actor than I actually give myself credit for.
So, since we're in the David Keighley Theater, it seems only appropriate that David Keighley, who is joining us today, ask a question. So, David, come on.
Oh, okay. I can probably talk loud enough, but okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Denny and Greg did an amazing job, and I've been in this business a long time, and the master of this is called a DI, Digital Intermediate, and it was shot in the area left that only has 4,400 pixels across, and I thought I'd never say this, but I think this DI is the finest DI I've ever seen. and it rivals capturing in 1570 film. I didn't think I'd ever say this, because it's my 50th year in this business, and I've seen a lot of DIs. Now I want to ask Greg something I've been interested in. So this is a 1:4:3 screen, and the Ariel F is a 1:4:3 sensor, because we love the height in IMAX theaters like in City Walk and about 50 theaters around the world. When you shot the scope, did you crop it or did you use anamorphic lenses?
We used Panavision Ultra Vista 1.65 times anamorphics. So to basically utilize the entire
chip.
Yeah,
Use the entire chip. But that makes a lot of sense. And of course, when you went 1:4:3, you use the whole chip with the spherical lens.
Correct.
In other words, a round lens.
Correct.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah. Basically, we realized that megapixels and resolution and all that can be a little bit of a buzzword, and some people throw them around as being the holy grail. Like, what's the size of the sensor, or what's the megapixels? We try to utilize every single pixel for every single frame. To that point, knowing that someone's going to be sitting there in these seats, looking at it that size, you don't really. I mean, of course, you could crop if you wanted to, but you don't want to if you can avoid it. So the fact that we weren't was just amazing.
This proves you know what you're doing.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Greg and Mary and Denis, for an amazing conversation. Please, everyone, just make sure you spread the word about Dune on social media, because I mean, this is a masterpiece film. Everyone needs to
You're very generous. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.